The sound is what I remember first, not the heat, not the light, not even the feeling of being thrown across the compartment like a child's doll discarded in rage. The sound. It began as a whisper, a low harmonic that made my teeth ache and my fillings vibrate, and then it became everything. It became the whole universe compressed into a single instant of noise so profound that it erased thought itself. I have tried to describe it to the Medicae staff here in Recovery Bay 17, tried to make them understand what it means to hear a Voidship scream, but they look at me with those tired eyes and mark something on their data slates and move on to the next bed. They have heard too many stories from too many survivors. They no longer have the capacity to care about the specifics of our agonies. My name is Marcus Delane, and I served as Ordnance Handler Second Class aboard the Righteous Fury, a lunar-class cruiser attached to Battlefleet Obscurus, for 11 standard years before the incident that has left me here, wrapped in burn dressings and suspended in a nutrient cradle while what remains of my skin attempts to knit itself back together. I am told I am lucky. I am told that of the 4,732 souls aboard during the primary detonation, fewer than 600 survived to reach the rescue vessels. I am told that I should thank the Emperor for my deliverance. I have tried. The words will not come. When I close my eyes to pray, all I see is fire, and all I hear is that sound, and all I feel is the heat of 300,000 macro cannon shells cooking off in a chain reaction that turned our ammunition reserves into a sun burning at the heart of our ship. I want to tell you what happens when the ammo reserves on a Voidship explode. I want to give you the technical specifications, the damage assessments, the casualty reports filed in triplicate for the Administratum's archives. But that is not what I have to offer. I can only tell what it feels like to be inside it, to be one of the small creatures caught in the machinery of catastrophe, and to somehow crawl out the other side with enough of myself intact to remember. We knew something was wrong 3 days before the explosion. Chief Brennan had mentioned it during shift change, a casual observation that I now replay endlessly in my memory, searching for the moment when we might have stopped what was coming. The temperature readings in Magazine 7 were elevated, not dangerously so, not enough to trigger the automated alerts that would have brought the engine seer cast down upon us with their chanted diagnostics and their sacred unguents, but enough to notice, enough to comment upon. Brennan was a 30-year veteran of ordnance work, a man whose face was more scar tissue than flesh after an accident in his youth involving a mishandled plasma cell. He had developed an instinct for trouble, a sixth sense for the small wrongnesses that preceded disaster. He told me to keep an eye on it. He told me to log the readings manually every 4 hours just in case. He told me that something felt off in the deep decks, that the ship was making sounds he did not recognize, that the machine spirits seemed restless. I logged the readings. I watched the numbers creep upward by fractions of a degree so slowly that any single measurement could be dismissed as instrument error. I mentioned it to Lieutenant Vasquez during my weekly report, and she nodded and made a note and told me she would flag it for review at the next maintenance cycle. The next maintenance cycle was scheduled for 6 weeks out. The explosion happened in 3 days. I have asked myself 1,000 times whether I should have pushed harder, whether I should have gone over Vasquez's head, whether I should have caused a scene that might have brought attention to what was happening in Magazine 7. The answer is always the same. In the Imperial Navy, you do not cause scenes. You follow the chain of command. You trust that the systems in place will catch the problems before they become catastrophes. You trust and you serve, and you die when the systems fail. The first explosion came at 0347 ship's time, during the third watch when the crew was at minimum staffing and the corridors were quiet except for the eternal hum of the plasma reactors and the distant chanting of the engine seers in their sacred spaces. I was asleep in my berth, 3 decks above Magazine 7 when it happened. The initial detonation was a single torpedo warhead, a cyclonic-class ship-to-ship munition with enough explosive yield to crack open a small moon. Later, the survivors would piece together what happened from the damage patterns and the fragmented logs recovered from the cogitator cores. The heat buildup in Magazine 7 had reached a critical threshold sometime in the previous hours. The coolant systems, which should have compensated automatically, had failed due to a fault in the sacred circuitry that no one had detected during the last inspection. The warhead's detonator, designed to be stable under combat conditions, had proven less stable under conditions of sustained thermal stress. It had cooked off without warning, and its detonation had triggered the warheads stored beside it, which had triggered the ones beside them, and so on in a cascade that consumed the entire magazine in less than 4 seconds. I did not know any of this when the deck beneath my berth bucked like a living thing and threw me into the overhead. I did not know that Magazine 7 had just ceased to exist, taking with it 300 crew members who had been sleeping in the compartments directly above and below. I did not know that the blast had breached 4 bulkheads and compromised the structural integrity of decks 6 through 12. All I knew was that the world had become sound and motion, that the air tasted of copper and burned plastic, that emergency lighting was flickering red in the darkness, and that somewhere nearby, someone was screaming in a voice that did not sound human. The screaming stopped after a few seconds. In retrospect, this was not a mercy. It meant that whoever had been screaming had either died or lost the capacity for vocalization. I pulled myself from the wreckage of my berth, finding that I was mostly intact except for a deep gash across my left forearm where a piece of shattered plating had opened me to the bone. The blood looked black in the emergency lighting. I tore a strip from my sleep shirt and wrapped the wound as tightly as I could, and then I began to move toward the compartment hatch because movement was all I had, because standing still felt like dying. The corridor outside was a vision of a nightmare I had not known I carried inside me. The blast wave had torn through the bulkhead on the far end, leaving a jagged hole that opened onto a space filled with orange light and rolling smoke. I could see bodies in the smoke, or pieces of bodies, silhouettes that might have been my crewmates, reduced to scattered components. The deck was tilted at an angle that made walking difficult, and I had to brace myself against the wall to keep from sliding toward the breach. The ship's Vox system was squalling something incomprehensible, a mix of automated warnings and human voices all overlapping into static. I heard the words, "Hull breach," and "Abandon," and "Emperor preserve" before the system cut out entirely, replaced by a silence that was somehow worse. I started moving toward the emergency muster point, because that was what training demanded, because in the absence of orders the protocols we had drilled 1,000 times became the only guide. I had made it perhaps 20 meters when the second explosion hit. The second explosion was Magazine 5. It was smaller than Magazine 7, containing mostly solid-shot rounds for the broadside batteries rather than the high-yield warheads stored in the primary magazines. But it was closer to the reactor compartments, and its detonation sent a shockwave through the ship's spine that I felt in my teeth and my bones and the base of my skull. The deck heaved again, and this time I heard something I will never forget. The ship groaned. The entire vessel, all 12 kilometers of consecrated metal and sacred machinery, groaned like a living creature in agony. I have been told that this was simply the sound of structural members failing under stress, of bulkheads tearing and decks buckling as the ship's integrity began to fail. But I know what I heard. The righteous Fury was dying and she was crying out in pain, and there was nothing any of us could do to save her. The emergency lighting died completely after the second explosion, plunging the corridor into darkness so absolute that I could not see my own hand in front of my face. I stood there in the black, listening to the ship's death sounds, feeling the heat from the fires somewhere below beginning to seep up through the deck plating. I thought about lying down. I thought about closing my eyes and waiting for whatever was coming, because surely it would be faster and easier than trying to navigate through a dying ship with no light and no guidance and no hope of survival. I thought about Chief Brennan, who had warned me about the temperature readings, who had trusted me to flag the problem, who had probably died in the first explosion along with everyone else on the ordnance decks. I thought about my sister, who lived on a mining world in the Segmentum Tempestus, who I had not seen in 6 years, who I had promised to visit during my next shore leave. I thought about the letter I had been composing to her in my head, the one I had never gotten around to writing down, the one that would now never be sent. I thought about all of this in the span of perhaps 3 heartbeats, and then I heard a voice in the darkness. The voice said my name. It said Delane in a tone that was calm and measured and entirely wrong for the circumstances. I turned toward the sound, still unable to see anything, and I said, "Who is there?" in a voice that came out as a croak because my throat was coated with smoke and fear. The voice did not answer immediately. Instead, I heard footsteps, slow and deliberate, moving toward me through the darkness. I pressed my back against the wall and reached for the utility knife on my belt, suddenly certain that whatever was coming toward me was not a fellow survivor, was not a crewmate looking for help, was something else entirely. A light appeared. It was not the warm yellow of a glow globe or the harsh white of an emergency lumen. It was pale green, the color of the bioluminescent organisms that grew in the bilge tanks, and it seemed to emanate from the figure approaching me without any visible source. The figure was wearing the robes of an enginseer, the red fabric now blackened and torn by the explosions, and where its face should have been there was only a mask of bronze and copper that reflected the green light in ways that made my eyes hurt. It stopped perhaps 2 meters away from me, and I realized that I could hear machinery, the soft whir of servo motors and the click of pneumatic joints, and that beneath the torn robes I could see the gleam of metal where flesh should have been. "Ordnance Handler Delane," the figure said, and its voice came from a Vox grill mounted in its throat rather than anything resembling a human mouth. "You logged temperature anomalies in Magazine 7. You flagged them for review." I nodded, not trusting my voice. The figure tilted its head at an angle that no human neck could achieve, and I saw something move behind its eyes, something that might have been lenses refocusing or something else entirely. The fault was not in the coolant systems, the figure said. The fault was introduced deliberately. Someone modified the sacred circuitry to fail. Someone wanted the magazines to cook off. I stared at the figure in the pale green light, trying to process what it was telling me. Sabotage. The explosion that had killed hundreds of my crewmates, that was in the process of killing the ship itself, had been deliberate. Someone had murdered the righteous Fury and everyone aboard her. Who? I managed to ask. Who did this? The figure turned its head, that inhuman rotation of servo motors and pneumatic joints, and looked toward the breach at the end of the corridor. The orange light from the fires was growing brighter. I could feel the heat increasing on my exposed skin. "Come with me," the figure said. "There is a path to the savior pods on Deck 14. The corridors are compromised, but the maintenance shafts remain intact. I will guide you." I did not ask why it had chosen to save me. I did not ask how it knew my name, or why it cared about my logged reports, or what it meant by deliberate sabotage. I simply followed, because following was the only option, because standing still in the darkness while the ship died around me was no option at all. The maintenance shafts were never meant for human traverse. They were designed for servo skulls and maintenance servitors, narrow channels filled with cabling and piping, and the accumulated grime of centuries of shipboard operation. The engineer moved through them with inhuman ease, its augmented body twisting and compressing in ways that made my stomach turn. I followed as best I could, crawling on hands and knees through spaces that scraped my shoulders and caught my uniform on jutting pipes. The green light from the figure ahead was my only guide, and I focused on it with the intensity of prayer, because losing sight of it meant losing any hope of finding my way out. As we crawled, the enginseer spoke to me. Its voice emerged from its Vox grill in flat, emotionless tones, but the information it conveyed was anything but calm. It told me that the sabotage had been discovered 2 days before the explosion by a junior tech adept conducting a routine inspection. It told me that the junior tech adept had filed a report with the ship's Magos Prime, who had ordered the information suppressed pending a full investigation. It told me that the Magos Prime had been in Magazine 7 when the first warhead detonated, along with the junior tech adept and everyone else who knew about the sabotage. It told me that the only records that remained were my temperature logs, filed through the standard Navy channels rather than the Mechanicus data shrines that had been destroyed in the blast. "You are the only surviving witness to the anomaly," the engineer said, pausing at a junction in the maintenance shaft where 3 paths diverged into darkness. "Your records will be critical to the investigation." I wanted to ask why that mattered. I wanted to point out that we were crawling through the bowels of a dying ship while fires raged and bulkheads failed and thousands of our crewmates perished around us. But the figure had already started moving again, taking the leftmost path, and I had no choice but to follow. The third explosion hit as we emerged from the maintenance shafts onto Deck 14. This one was different from the first 2. It was not the sharp crack of munitions detonating, but a deeper, more sustained roar that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The deck shook beneath my feet, and I heard a sound like metal tearing, like the hull itself being ripped open from the inside. The engineer paused, its head tilted at that unnatural angle, listening to something I could not hear. "The reactor containment has failed," it said, and for the first time I thought I detected something like emotion in its synthesized voice, something like fear. "Primary plasma core is venting into the engineering sections. We have approximately 17 minutes before thermal cascade reaches this deck." 17 minutes. I had 17 minutes to reach a savior pod, launch into the void, and pray that one of the escort vessels would detect my beacon before my oxygen ran out. I started running without waiting for the engineer to lead the way. The corridor ahead was lit by the flickering emergency lumens that still functioned on this deck, and I could see the yellow markings that indicated the path to the pod bays. I could hear other survivors now, voices shouting in the distance, the sound of running feet and slamming hatches. The ship was emptying, everyone who could still move racing toward the few escape routes that remained. The first body I encountered was Lieutenant Vasquez. She was lying in the middle of the corridor, her uniform charred and her hair burned away, and for a moment I thought she was dead. Then her eyes opened, and she looked at me with an expression of such profound pain that I felt my heart crack inside my chest. Her legs were gone below the knees. The wounds had been cauterized by the heat of the explosion that had taken them, which meant she was not bleeding out, which meant she was conscious and aware and experiencing every moment of her dying. "Delane," she whispered. Her voice was barely audible over the alarms and the roaring of distant fires. "I should have... the temperature logs, I should have..." I knelt beside her. I took her hand, which was cold despite the heat of the air around us. I wanted to say something comforting, something about the Emperor's light and the rewards that awaited the faithful, but the words would not come. All I could think about was the engineer's revelation: sabotage. Someone had done this deliberately. Someone had murdered Lieutenant Vasquez's legs and Chief Brennan and 300 people in Magazine 7 and all the others who had died and were dying throughout the ship. "Who did this?" I asked her. "Do you know who sabotaged the magazines?" Her eyes widened slightly, and I saw recognition there, understanding. She knew something. She had known something all along. "Kovacs," she whispered. Engineering. Kovacs was asking questions about the magazine layout, access codes. Her grip on my hand tightened, then relaxed. Her eyes remained open, but the light behind them faded, and I knew she was gone. I stayed there for a moment, kneeling beside her body, processing the name she had given me. Kovacs. I knew that name. Chief Engineer Kovacs, a fixture of the engineering decks for as long as I had served aboard. A quiet man, competent and professional, who had never given any indication that he harbored thoughts of mass murder. The engineer's voice came from behind me. "We must continue. 14 minutes remain." I stood. I stepped over Lieutenant Vasquez's body, and I continued toward the pod bays, and I tried not to think about the fact that somewhere in this dying ship there might be a man named Kovacs who had killed thousands of people, who had killed my crewmates and my superiors and my friends, and who might still be alive and moving toward the same escape pods I was racing to reach. The pod bay was chaos. Perhaps 200 survivors had converged on the same location, all of them trying to squeeze into pods designed to hold 20 people each. I saw men and women fighting each other for places, saw an armsman draw his last pistol and fire into the crowd to clear a path for a group of officers. saw bodies trampled underfoot as the desperate mass surged toward the launch tubes. The Enginseer had vanished somewhere behind me, disappearing into the crowd, or perhaps into one of the side passages that led to the Mechanicus exclusive evacuation routes. I was alone, just another body in the crush, just another terrified soul trying to claw my way to salvation. I made it to a pod. I do not know how. I remember elbows in my ribs and boots on my feet and someone's blood on my face. And then I was inside a metal cylinder that smelled of fierce sweat and recycled air, pressed against strangers who were all breathing too fast and praying too loud. The hatch sealed with a hiss of pressurization, and I felt the launch cradle engage, and then we were moving, accelerating away from the righteous fury at a velocity that pressed me into the padding of the seat and made my vision gray at the edges. Through the tiny viewport beside me, I watched the ship die. The thermal cascade reached the primary fuel reserves perhaps 3 minutes after our pod launched. The explosion was not like the ones I had experienced aboard. It was silent because we were in the void now, beyond the reach of sound waves, and it was beautiful in a way that made me want to scream. The righteous fury came apart in a flower of white-hot plasma that expanded outward in all directions, consuming the ship's structure in waves that peeled away deck after deck after deck. I saw the distinctive shape of the command tower separate from the main hull and tumble into the plasma cloud. I saw the prow section where the primary weapons batteries were mounted crack and shatter into spinning fragments that caught the light of the explosion like diamonds scattered across black velvet. I saw 12 kilometers of consecrated metal, home to nearly 5,000 souls, transformed into an expanding cloud of debris and cooling plasma in the space of perhaps 30 seconds. I watched until the light faded, until the cloud began to disperse, until there was nothing left but scattered debris drifting in the void. Then I closed my eyes and leaned back against the seat and listened to the sounds of the other survivors around me. Someone was sobbing. Someone else was praying in a low, fervent whisper. Someone was vomiting into their hands because there was nowhere else for it to go. We drifted for 19 hours before the rescue ships found us. During that time, I thought about what Lieutenant Vasquez had told me. I thought about Chief Engineer Kovacs, about his quiet demeanor and his professional competence and the questions he had apparently been asking. About magazine access codes. I thought about why someone would do such a thing, would murder thousands of their own crewmates, would destroy a ship of the line that had served the Emperor for 3 centuries. I could not find an answer that made sense. Chaos, corruption, political conspiracy, personal vendetta? None of it seemed adequate to explain the scale of what had happened. When the rescue ship's Medicae finally got around to examining me, they found that the gash on my arm had become infected during the hours in the escape pod. They cleaned it and sealed it and gave me something for the pain, and then they asked me questions about what I had seen and heard and experienced. I told them about the temperature anomalies. I told them about Lieutenant Vasquez and the name she had given me. I told them about the Enginseer who had guided me through the maintenance shafts and spoken of deliberate sabotage. They made notes on their data slates and exchanged looks that I could not interpret, and then they left me alone in my cot in Recovery Bay 17. 3 days later they came back. Not the Medicae this time, but officers in dark uniforms with faces like carved stone and eyes that had seen things I could not imagine. They asked me the same questions again, and I gave them the same answers, and then they told me that there was no Chief Engineer Kovacs aboard the Righteous Fury. They told me that the name appeared in no crew manifest, no duty roster, no record of any kind. They told me that the Enginseer I had described did not match any of the tech priests assigned to the ship, all of whom had perished in the explosion. They told me that Lieutenant Vasquez's body had never been recovered, that her remains had been consumed in the thermal cascade along with everything else in that corridor. They told me, in the kindest terms they could manage, that my account was unreliable, that the trauma of the explosion had created false memories that there was no evidence of. Sabotage, and no evidence of conspiracy, and no evidence of anything except a tragic accident caused by a malfunction in systems that had not been properly maintained. I did not argue with them. I had seen the way they looked at me when they said these things, the careful blankness of their expressions that suggested they knew exactly what they were doing and why. Someone did not want the truth of the righteous fury to be known. Someone with enough power to make an investigation vanish, to rewrite the records, to transform murder into accident and conspiracy into coincidence. That was 8 weeks ago. I am still in Recovery Bay 17, though the burns have mostly healed and the infection in my arm has been eliminated, and there is no medical reason for me to remain. Every time I ask about discharge, I am told that there is more paperwork to process, more evaluations to complete, more time required before I can return to duty. I have begun to understand that I am not being treated, I am being held, I am being stored until someone decides what to do with me, whether to release me with a false story burned into my memory or to make me disappear entirely. At night, when the lights in the recovery bay dim and the other patients fall into their drugged slumber, I lie awake and listen to the sounds of the ship around me. This vessel, too, has magazines filled with munitions. This vessel, too, has systems that could fail, and explosions that could cascade, and fires that could consume everything within reach. I listen to the subtle sounds of the hull, the creaking of metal under stress, the distant hum of plasma reactors, and I wonder if somewhere in the engineering decks there is another Kovacs, another quiet man asking questions about access codes, another hand reaching out to set the dominoes falling. The engineer's words echo in my memory. The fault was introduced deliberately. Someone wanted the magazines to cook off. I close my eyes and I see the green light that emanated from its form, the inhuman tilt of its head, the gleam of bronze and copper where its face should have been. I wonder if it was real. I wonder if I imagined it, trauma creating hallucinations in the smoke and darkness of a dying ship. I wonder if it matters. I have begun to hear sounds at night. Footsteps in the corridor outside the recovery bay, slow and deliberate, the soft whir of servo motors and the click of pneumatic joints. I have begun to see shadows at the edges of my vision, shapes that move wrong, figures that bend at angles no human body should bend. I do not know if these are the lingering effects of trauma or something else entirely. I do not know if I am being watched, evaluated, prepared for some fate that I cannot yet perceive. I only know that I am afraid in a way I have never been afraid before, not even in the burning corridors of the righteous fury, not even with the ship dying around me and the heat of plasma fires blistering my skin. I have started writing this account because I need someone to know what really happened. I have hidden it in a gap behind my cot, in a space between the bulkhead and the deck plating where the cleaning servitors do not reach. If you are reading this, it means that I am gone, that whatever they decided to do with me has been done, and that this record is all that remains of Ordnance Handler, second-class Marcus Delane, and his testimony about the death of the righteous fury. Take it for what it is worth. Believe it or do not believe it, but know that somewhere in the vast machinery of the Imperium, there are those who would murder thousands to hide their secrets, who would destroy ships of the line to cover their tracks, who would erase witnesses and rewrite history and make truth into madness. Know that when the ammo reserves on a Voidship explode, it is not always an accident. Know that sometimes it is the first shot in a war that no one will ever acknowledge, a battle fought in shadows and silence, a conflict whose casualties will be logged as training accidents and equipment failures and unexplained disappearances. Know that I tried to tell the truth, and that the truth was too dangerous to be allowed. The footsteps are coming closer tonight. I can hear them in the corridor, measured and patient, drawing nearer with each passing moment. The green light is visible now beneath the hatch, a pale glow that seeps through the seams and casts strange shadows on the deck. I do not know what is coming for me. I do not know if it is the same figure that guided me through the maintenance shafts or something else wearing its shape. I only know that my time for hiding is over and that whatever happens next will happen soon. I have finished writing. I have said everything I needed to say. If there is anyone out there who cares about the dead of the righteous fury, anyone who wants to know why 4,132 souls perished in a cascade of fire and plasma, anyone who is willing to look beyond the official reports and the sanitized histories and the convenient explanations. Then start with the name Kovacs. Start with the questions about magazine access codes. Start with the temperature anomalies in Magazine 7, the ones I log dutifully every 4 hours, the ones that someone modified the sacred circuitry to create. Start there, and maybe you will find the truth that I could not. Maybe you will understand what happened to us, and why, and who was responsible. Maybe you will bring justice to the dead, though I doubt it. The Imperium does not deal in justice. It deals in order, and order requires that some truths remain buried, that some questions remain unanswered, that some screams echo forever in the void without anyone to hear them. The hatch is opening now, the green light is flooding in, and I can see the figure silhouetted against it, the red robes and the bronze mask, and the inhuman angles of its augmented form. It is speaking my name in. That flat, synthesized voice. It is telling me that it is time to go. It is extending one metal hand toward me, fingers clicking and whirring with mechanical precision. I am going to go with it, not because I want to, but because there is nowhere else to go, because running is pointless, because in the end we are all just components in the machinery of something too vast to comprehend. I am going to walk out of this recovery bay and into whatever fate has been prepared for me, and I am going to leave this account behind as the only proof that I ever existed, that any of us ever existed, that the righteous fury was more than just a line in some administratum ledger waiting to be archived and forgotten. Remember us, that is all I ask. Remember that we lived and served and died, and that our deaths meant something even if no one will ever acknowledge it. Remember that when the ammo reserves explode, there is more than just fire and metal and the screaming of a dying ship. There are people inside that fire. There are faces in the flames. There are stories that end in the middle of sentences, prayers cut short by the roar of detonation, dreams that evaporate in the heat of plasma cascade. The figure is waiting, the green light is calling, my time is done. Somewhere in the void, the debris of the righteous fury is still drifting, cooling fragments of what was once home to thousands. Somewhere in the archives, my temperature logs still exist, flagged for review, forgotten in the endless paperwork of the Imperial bureaucracy. Somewhere, perhaps, someone will read this account and wonder if it is true. I hope they never find out. I hope they live their lives in the comfortable certainty that accidents happen and systems fail and sometimes ships just explode without any malicious intent. I hope they never feel what I felt, crawling through maintenance shafts while the ship died around me, watching friends and colleagues burn, discovering that the death of everything I knew was not random chance but deliberate design. But if they do find out, if they are drawn into the same dark current that has swept me away, then I want them to know one thing. The Engenzir told me that I was a witness. It told me that my records would be critical to the investigation. It told me that the truth mattered, even in the heart of a catastrophe, even as the ship screamed and the magazines cooked off and the void waited to claim us all. I do not know if it was lying. I do not know if it was testing me, or using me, or simply following some protocol that I could not understand. I only know that for a few hours in the darkness of a dying ship, someone or something wanted me to survive. Someone or something guided me through the fire and the destruction and the chaos, and brought me to a place where I could bear witness to what had happened. Maybe that is all any of us can do. Bear witness, record what we see and hear and experience, even when no one wants to listen. Speak the names of the dead, even when those names have been erased from official records. Remember the truth, even when the truth has been declared madness. I am rising from my cot now. I am walking toward the figure in the green light. I am leaving this account behind, hidden in the gap between bulkhead and deck, waiting for someone to find it. Remember the righteous fury. Remember Magazine 7. Remember the sound of a Voidship screaming as it died, and the silence that followed when there was nothing left to scream. Remember that I tried to tell you what happens when the ammo reserves explode. The figure has taken my hand. Its metal fingers are cold against my skin, and the green light is washing over me, and the recovery bay is fading behind me as we walk into the corridor and toward whatever comes next. I can hear the other patients stirring in their cots, disturbed by the light and the movement, but they will not remember any of this in the morning. They will wake to find my bed empty and my belongings gone, and the Medicae will tell them that I was transferred to another facility, and that will be the end of Marcus Delane as far as anyone knows. But you know different. You know what I saw and heard and survived. You know that the righteous Fury was murdered, not merely destroyed. You know that somewhere in the Imperium, there are those who deal in death on a scale that defies comprehension, who sacrifice ships and crews as casually as a priest sacrifices incense to the Emperor. Carry that knowledge with you. Let it burn in your mind like the fires that consumed my home. Let it remind you that in the grim darkness of the far future, there are worse things than the enemies we know. Sometimes the worst enemy is the one wearing the same uniform, walking the same corridors, speaking the same prayers. Sometimes the ammunition reserves do not explode by accident. Sometimes someone lights